Hi, and welcome back to Reconnected, your home for everything strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I'm Teho lead strategist here at Reconnected. In this video, I'm going to continue sharing insights with you to better understand the modern African consumer. So, the first point we're going to cover in this video is urbanization trends. Africa is well known for being largely underdeveloped. Although we have large cities like Johannesburg and Lagos, a majority of the continent still lives rather rural lifestyles. So there are many large opportunities for business in the world of construction and infrastructure development because there are many places that still need things like trains, roads, transportation, but that does not mean that those people are disconnected. I will say that African economies have done a great job of connecting different tiers of the economy versus other parts of the world. So don't think of those places as like barren wastelands. They have things like digital connectivity, communal structures, local businesses, and have developed themselves to a certain point. But obviously, large scales infrastructure, things like trains and public transportation and healthcare and all these things require larger investment than one or two towns can afford to give themselves. So there's just a huge pull to bring in foreign investors to help rural communities, some of which also under traditional rules, like under chiefs. There is a huge pull for them to bring in some type of foreign investment to help them develop things that the government has failed to develop for them. We've seen many examples of this. In fact, this was essentially what the BRICS Development Bank was made for. It was so that countries could access aid specifically for infrastructure projects because it was getting unmanageable to borrow from institutions like the IMF. And like I mentioned when we were discussing the overall topic of investing into Africa in 2025, over the past 10 years, there has been a huge increase in government awareness that they can't do every infrastructure and development project themselves and fund it through foreign aid and foreign loans. They have therefore developed local systems to allow for more private foreign investor in large scale industries like infrastructure development. If you are in the world of construction and development and you can build realistic infrastructure for communities, then Africa is definitely a place for you to look at. I emphasize on realistic infrastructure, not hotels and wasteful expenditure of land. I'm talking pipes for water, electricity wiring, tunnels, train tracks. So you're basically signing on 20 years, 50 years. It is a long term commitment. Point number two, the rising middle class. Unlike the Western world, the global South is experiencing a large rise in our middle class, especially in more globalist democratic nations like South Africa, with the rise of just a more educated, diverse, multipolar, competitive market comes things like more competitive salaries and just more competitive people. So that means there is a slight rise in income and a differentiation of lifestyle standards. And there's an aspect of societal development towards, just bigger and flashier and fancier things like the global middle class likes. So, as there's a rising middle class, there is more room for things like luxury products and frivolous items, not necessarily just marketing products tailored around sustainability and survival as people are used to in Africa. A great example of the rising middle class is how the luxury market in South Africa is blowing up. 2 years ago, they opened the Diamond Walk, and since then, they have welcomed all kinds of luxury designers from around the world, like Balmain, Bulgari, Ferragamo, Louis Vuitton, and most of those items are obviously purchased on credit. The cost of a French and Italian designer handbag, when translated into South African currency, is almost the cost of like a small car. It is an asset. So a lot of people purchase it on credit. And I think it also reflects in your taxes every year. So it is a rising middle class status symbol here as well because of what you have to do to qualify to get it. It differentiates you from the rest of the middle class. And as we know, the middle class loves identification markers of differentiation from lower classes. I do encourage people trying to build luxury products to come into Africa, but I suggest coming at a lower, more realistic price point so that people aren't taking on large scale debts with crushing interest points just to avoid your product. You should consider the access point, like how high or how low it is for your luxury goods, because some of them are just simply too high when converted to local currencies. But a lot of what these brands that are in South Africa right now are doing is tailoring the payment plans and their price points to the African market for the products that are available to us. Next point, Africa's youth dividend. So, about 60% of the overall African population is under the age of 25. And when people talk about it a lot, it's like, oh, it's young, it's your fertile ground, da, 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 all the positives. And yes, there is positives. But if you're someone trying to launch a business or a brand into the African market today, what that actually means is there's very low levels of brand loyalty. There's very little access to credit, and there is a lot of hype business. So, things that are very short lived because the youth have low attention spans, they don't have savings. Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't receive like traditional allowances and things like kids of millennials and boomers used to. So, their concept of money and finances are completely different. That's what also adds another layer of difficulty of selling certain products in Africa that might be marketed overseas for a more mature audience or even a younger audience, but when it gets to Africa, it like flips. I guess a good example that I can give is the brand Dickies. Dickies traditionally is a overall workman's brand, but in South Africa they had a very strong streetwear era. they For some reason the nostalgia and the imagery at the time was trending of workwear in streetwear, and young people really started to support the brand. They started running more streetwear adjacent campaigns, but around the world, Dickies is just a workman's brand. So things like that, where it can apply completely differently in Africa just because of the younger population's different perspective of things and trends and all those things. So it is good to consider the flip side of having a large youth population is not just in this endless potential. There's also barriers of understanding and access and perspective that you must consider before entering this market. The next point will be the informal economy. Similarly to how Africa has multiple power structures, we also have multiple economic structures. We have the formal economy, and I guess that's the Western one, businesses, registered businesses, taxes, employees, that whole regular business thing. But then we also have the informal economy, things like street hawkers and informal businesses that usually serve lower class or lower budget consumers. Informal economies are common across the global south, but I will say in Africa it's a bit more formalized. Selling certain items through the informal economy allows people to find a way to provide for themselves. There are generational businesses in the informal economy sector. There is a supply chain and everything that is formalized and trackable. Don't confuse the informal economy with the illicit economy. They're not the same thing. A good example of this is actually a snack brand. Snacks don't do well in the formal economy in terms of like groceries and stores. Their day-to-day sales are very low. Snacks are largely sold through the informal economy. So there's actually a brand that just popped up out of nowhere across tuck shops, literally across the country. It's the snack of like these little chocolate balls, like this sweet little crunchy wafer chocolate ball, basically. Come to find out that that is actually a brand from, I think it's the Philippines or Indonesia, somewhere in Southeast Asia. And they actually are a recognized, popular, familiar brand in that country. So they came to South Africa and realized that this is how snacks are sold, and they price themselves competitively in line with other snacks in tuck shops. So don't discount the informal economy by any means. Work with a strategist that understands the pros and cons of both economies and how to run your business legitimately in both of them. Point number 5, economic disparities. Africa has a very broad economic spectrum. So, as such, it's very important for you to get your targeting and your market segmentation very correct because just a small difference of 100 or 200 Rand a month of income and disposable income can really change a consumer's behavior. We have very price sensitive consumers at all levels of income because we know how easy it is to start slipping down that economic class level, you know? So even though you might think that a high net worth individual is interested in this product and all these things, they might not be willing to take the risk of taking on extra credit, for example, in order to have this product. But someone who is middle class might be willing to take on this extra credit so that they can have certain social symbols from that car that the high net worth individual doesn't care about anymore. Does that make sense? So when adopting your products for the African market, also include how these income disparities do affect consumer behavior and the options that consumers are even willing to consider when everyone is just so price sensitive. Look at your brand from a broad spectrum point of view, not just thinking of trying to replicate the market that you have overseas here. Um, but yeah, I think that is all the advice that I'll be sharing in this video. I hope that I have helped you better understand the African consumer. But if you are serious about exploring business opportunities in Africa, reach out to us at Reconnected. We are a strategy consultancy that specializes in helping entrepreneurs and investors best position themselves for success in Africa. Thank you for watching and definitely let us know how we can help you.